you, Mr. Chairman. This is a bit of a perennial for those of us that have been part of this amalgamated council. Councillor Webster had very strong views on it. I didn't see it as the colonial, paternalistic, da-da-da-da-da-da. I simply wanted to see people engaging with this council, because I think if there's one way in which we can improve the woeful approval ratings for this council, it's to actually give people the confidence that they will be heard. I think that's a real fundamental. So, this has been, in speaking perhaps through you to Councillor Simpson, this has actually been quite a sore point. And there hasn't been always the level of satisfaction that Councillor Cashmore has experienced. I think part of the reason that there has been an appalling turnout in the past was the governance structure that we had, that had multiple meetings taking place at the same time, which made it very, very hard for councillors to prioritise. Now that's changed under this council, so I don't see that that is necessarily going to be therefore a distraction as it has proved in the past. I want to make it quite clear that what I understand from this amendment, it's not an either or.
Correct.
It is simply allowing people to respond in the way that they want. Now, for some people, appearing, and you will have great experience of this, appearing before a select committee is intimidating. They feel they've got to have a lawyer. But I've seen many a chair have the ability, and councillors, to put people at ease and give them that comfort that they don't have to have representation with them. What we are trying to achieve here is a council that is for the young as much as it is for the old. Councillor Simpson is right in saying let's see what kind of response we get, but I would not want to be the officer of this council that is going to determine who a key stakeholder is or not. Is it this environmental group? Is it this health group? Is it the Labour Party? Is it the Gareth Morgan Party? I don't know. I wouldn't want to be the one to determine and prioritise who should be heard and who should not be heard. So I think that this is a really good measure for enabling us to go out for consultation, to get the feedback and to create those opportunities that will allow people, it's very much horses for courses. So we haven't had the opportunity to do this in the past. It was tested, and I hope we're going to take this by division today. But I applaud the mover and the seconder for bringing it forward, because I also have had a lot of correspondence and feedback from people who have been dissatisfied with the way in which we've consulted in the past. Now that might just reflect the people in the ward that I happen to know. I don't know. But I'd like to see it tested, and I'd like to see council's approval ratings increase, and we will do that when we give a measure of satisfaction to those that want to engage with council.
Thank you, Councillor Fletcher. Councillor Wayne Walker.
Sure. I'd like to speak in favour of this. For me, the important word there, or a very important word, is participate. So this enables people out there that want to submit to participate. Now, what precise form that participation takes will obviously depend on how many people there are, what issues they might coalesce around. So we might have a situation where if there are a number of people submitting around a particular point, that we might encourage them to collaborate to minimise the time. We might have a particular format for that in the meeting. So I can see a significant amount of flexibility that enables us to cope with this. But the important word that I go back to is participate. And following on from the comments that other councillors have made, we have to do better. These are very, very significant issues we're dealing with here. Some of them are structural around funding, and we need to be able to take Aucklanders with us. And the way you do that goes back to that word, participate, so they feel part of it. And sure, they can do something digitally and online, but there is no substitute for the person or people that want to front up and submit to us in person. And I actually enjoy that. So I'll be supporting this in principle.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Collins.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to add, there's a Tongan saying that says, for fole fale ka inga. And when the meaning of that saying in Tongan is that when people gather together to talk, to deliberate, to discuss, argue, contend, that everyone sits on the mat, and you roll out a mat and everyone sits on that mat, and together they're able to negotiate what they want to say. I introduce that because whilst I think my head supports this idea, my heart may not, and that's because there's a part of me that believes that there's still this hierarchy of feedback, and that the hierarchy of feedback is that you would be given better ability to be heard, or you're given a sense of your feedback's more important because you've come to a hearing as opposed to a have your say. Now, I want to comment later on in the general discussion about what my issues are with have your say. And I just wanted to introduce that because it's where I'm kind of sitting a little bit unsure at the moment, because I certainly know from the area that I represented as chair of Otara Papatoetoe, which had the lowest turnout of feedback for have your say events, that our people want to contribute, but I'm not sure that they feel like we are all sitting on the mat together. And a motion such as this sends another message to them, perhaps to say, if you don't turn up here, but you go to a have your say, you'll get kind of heard at have your say, but you've got more chance of being heard at this event, which are the kinds of events that our people will not want to be at because they are not considered safe. So that's my dilemma at the moment, because I understand where people are heading with this particular motion, but it concerns me that it doesn't reflect that Tongan style of everyone sits together at the mat. And that's just the thought I wanted to bring.
We could put a big mat there.
I'm happy for that to happen.
Thank you, Councillor. That's very interesting. Councillor Darby.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Look, I remember pushing quite strongly the significance and engagement policy through, I think it was late 14, Mr. Chief Executive. And it seems that people have forgotten a lot about that, because that's when we signalled that we actually wanted to move away from deadening, alien, statutory consultation, and we wanted to move towards genuine community engagement. And we've made moves in that regard positively each time we've needed to go out to our communities and discuss matters of importance, like the annual budget and many other things. I think we've made big inroads there, and as the Deputy Mayor has just reminded us all, the feedback coming in through the digital channels is just growing. We are tapping into young people like we've not tapped into them before. I'm not saying we're over the line there. We've got a long way to go. We're tapping into the so-called minorities in the city, the mix of ethnicities and religions and interest groups, and it goes on. My time in local government, sitting around so-called formal hearings, I've seen the usual suspects turn up, and I think our community expects us to be listening to more than the usual suspects. Usual suspects are valid, they bring their contribution, but we've got to tap into a wider base, and that's what we are embarking on. The evidence is that we're successful in that regard, but we've got a long way to travel. So I recall the last time we sat around this table listening to budget submissions, we struggled to get a third of the councillors at any one time. It was a shocker. And so while there might be some enthusiasm in the public guys here today, I challenge anybody suggesting that we go down that old track, which has proven to be a miserable failure, to be honest.
But that's nonsense.
No, that's my opinion, and I don't recall you being there, Councillor.
You weren't even a member of the council.
Order, please. Councillor Darby has the floor. Councillor Darby has the floor.
My observation, my experiences is less than a third of the councillors turned up.
Yep.
That is the reality, that is the truth, and if you go back and look at the record, that's what it will say. So while it may appear to be good today, here in the public guise, the reality is it did not work because the councillors, the elected members, did not front up.
That's nonsense.
And so I say here today, folks, let's move forward engaging rather than going down the old deadening consultation route.
Thank you very much, Councillor Darby. I've listened very closely to the debate, and I'd like to take a call, but in order that we all make an informed decision, I'd like to invite the Chief Executive Officer to indicate to all of us what the implications would be if we are to pass this resolution.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. If I could just draw your attention to Table 1. It's in the report, item 11, follows paragraph 52. That gives you the timetable of commitments that are already in your diary for this. So in the report,
What page?
it's in the actual
Page.
agenda report,
Page 13 on the agenda,
page 13.
In the agenda in your big tin.
item 52.
So you can see there that the program is already full. I think it would be reasonable to predict with the living wage proposal and other matters with the visitor levy that we could well get 500 submitters saying they want to speak to you. That will commit you to between 8 and 10 full days of hearings. And if it's in Finance and Performance Committee, you'll need a quorum of 12. We've got IMSB members, so we have more votes around the table. So we will need a quorum of 12 for those hearings to proceed. And Councillor Darby is quite right that we actually got ourselves into real difficulties pre the change in legislation because we were struggling to hold a quorum. So if you're going to go ahead with this because you think it's the right look in terms of your democratic processes, I would recommend that you simply say in an annual plan hearing before elected members, and we'll decide with you making the call on what the hearings panel looks like based on how many people submit. But if you're determined to do this at a committee of the whole and we get 500, it'll add about $500,000 to the process, and you've really got to think hard about what that adds to the process if you think about the past and how that works. So that's our advice, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Mr. Town. I listened with interest to the debate, and I withheld any comments because I wanted to hear what every councillor had to say. And can I first acknowledge that I think every councillor, however they might vote on this resolution, wants to maximise the participation and the consultation with the community.
Absolutely.
I'm not questioning anybody's integrity on that at all. And I guess the one of the comments that moved me most was the Councillor Collins's comments on how it might affect his community, because my experience, and it's not around council but it's around select committees, is that generally it was the best informed, the best educated, the most confident that turned up. And it's a big thing to come to Wellington, and it probably is a big thing to come to this committee for people out in our community. And if we genuinely want to reach out to people who we don't generally hear from, I don't think the traditional statutory process is the best way of doing that. I didn't make the change in the legislation, the government did. They made it more flexible because, as I understand it, the old way wasn't working. We can pretty much predict who will come along and who won't come along. And there are huge sections of our community, Maori, Pacifica, Asian, that won't be amongst the 500 that might turn up here. And that's why I think we need to reach out to the community rather than expect the community to come in to be part of this formal process. The other thing I'm worried about is this, and it goes to what Councillor Simpson was saying. Some of the local consultation processes have been really effective. Councillor Cashmore, you mentioned, several hundred people turning up. But if we create the impression that if you go to your local meeting, there'll only be 1 or 2 councillors, but alternatively you can come to the Finance and Performance Committee and there'll be a full house of councillors there ready to listen, you're not going to bother with the local and you're going to come here. And I just want to ask councillors, acknowledging the genuineness of your position, is that what you really want? Do you want us to actually undermine the local community meetings because we're effectively saying what will really count is to come here and talk to the full formal session? And if people do come and talk to the full formal session, it is a big commitment of time and money. If we're going to spend the $500,000 that Stephen Town talked about, I would rather actually spend it in outreach to the people we're not hearing from, rather than the formal process that actually will still be that elite type stakeholder involvement. I'd like to think that we would get a broad cross-section of people coming in here, but we won't. We'll get the organised and the aware and the informed. And I actually want to hear wider participation than that. And I think what Councillor Simpson was saying is exactly right. If there's only one councillor that turns up at a meeting, it's less likely to be effective than if there is a group. We all of the councillors, Mayor accepted, represent a particular ward, but I don't want you just to listen to your ward. I'd like you to go to some of the other meetings and make an event of it. When you have a select committee, there's 8 members of parliament there. When we have a have your say meeting, I'd like to see a group of councillors committed and listening.